My name is Leah Mercer, and I was 18 the morning my father tore up the scholarship packet that was supposed to get me out. He did it at the breakfast counter between the syrup and the electric bill, with my mother standing at the stove and my little brother asking if I could still wash his white baseball pants before practice. My father glanced at the letter once, saw the words full tuition scholarship and University of Cincinnati, and ripped the whole thing clean through like it was junk mail. Then he dropped the pieces beside my cereal bowl and said, "You don't need college. You need common sense." What he meant was, you need to stay. What he meant was, there is already a place for you here, and it is useful to everyone except you. By that evening I understood two things I should have learned years earlier. The first was that paper tears easier than a plan. The second was that my grandmother had been quietly keeping better records on this family than any of us knew. Welcome back to Real Family Voices, where the softest voice in the family is usually the one that finally changes everything. If you've ever been treated like your dreams were optional while everybody else's were considered a priority, stay with me on this one. And if you know what it feels like to be useful right up until the moment you want something for yourself, subscribe. These stories are for you. We lived outside Dayton in a low brick ranch with a detached garage that had been converted, at least in my father's mind, into headquarters for Mercer Heating and Air. The front of the garage had roll-up doors and shelves of copper fittings and compressor parts. The back had a narrow office with a dented metal desk, a filing cabinet that stuck in humid weather, and a computer that hummed like it resented being awake. That office was where I spent most of high school. Not because I worked there officially. Officially, I was just helping out. In family businesses, helping out is one of those phrases that stretches until it covers a whole life. By 14, I was answering service calls when Dad was on a ladder or in a crawl space. By 15, I was entering invoices and matching receipts. By 16, I knew which customers paid late, which supplier needed a reminder, and which account numbers my father always forgot. By 17, my mother was introducing me to people at church as Rick's right hand, like that was a compliment and not a warning. At school, I was the girl teachers described as dependable. At home, dependable meant I remembered everything nobody else wanted to remember. Tyler's dentist appointments. Grandma's prescriptions. Which vendors needed checks before Friday. Which utility bill would bounce if Dad bought parts before payday. I cooked dinner 3 nights a week because Mom worked better under pressure, but somehow never started supper until pressure meant I had to save it. I folded laundry while answering customer calls from the shop phone routed to my cell. I learned very young that if I kept enough plates spinning, nobody yelled. And if nobody yelled, that counted in our house as peace. My brother Tyler was 16 and good-looking in the easy, careless way of boys who have never once been told to shrink themselves. He played travel baseball. My parents spent weekends at tournaments, hotel money and gas money and restaurant money flowing out like there was always somehow more where that came from. When Tyler forgot a bag, somebody turned the car around. When Tyler wanted new cleats, it became urgent. When Tyler talked about maybe studying sports management someday, my father grinned like the future itself had just walked into the room and clapped him on the shoulder. I talked about numbers. I did not talk about them much at home. But I loved them. I loved that numbers stayed put. 2 plus 2 never turned into 3 because somebody louder wanted it to. Column either balanced or it didn't. A ledger either told the truth or left fingerprints where the truth had been moved. Numbers made sense to me in a house where everything important was always being redefined after the fact. My grandmother knew that before anyone else did. Her name was Evelyn Mercer. She was 79, lived in the small room off our laundry room after her knee replacement, and carried herself with the dry steadiness of a woman who had spent a lifetime not confusing noise with authority. She had been a payroll clerk for the county for 32 years, which in my father's version of family history got translated into Mom did office stuff. He said it the way some men say cute little hobby, as if she had been alphabetizing paper clips instead of balancing departments full of grown men who probably thought exactly as highly of themselves as he did. Grandma kept a narrow green ledger book on the table beside her chair. She wrote down everything. Not because she was suspicious, I thought. Just because that was who she was. Milk, stamps, church donation, blood pressure pills, birthday cards mailed. Every date in neat blue lines. Every total checked twice. I didn't know yet that she was writing down far more than groceries. The scholarship email came on a Thursday afternoon during study hall. I had used my school email, not the family one, because in our house private things had a way of becoming family things the minute anybody else noticed them. I opened the message on a library computer and read it once, then again, then a third time because the words felt too large to sit quietly on a screen. Congratulations! Full tuition merit scholarship. Honors admission. College of Business. For a second the room around me blurred. Not from tears. From relief so sudden it made me lightheaded. I had applied in secret over 6 months. Ms. Park, my guidance counselor, had stayed late to help me finish essays. My accounting teacher wrote a recommendation so strong I almost cried reading it. I filed the FAFSA section I could do. I filled out scholarship forms in the public library because the office computer at home was for business, which meant my father's business, not mine. Every little piece of it I did myself in stolen half hours between dinner and laundry and customer callbacks. And there it was. Proof that I was not crazy for wanting a life bigger than the one already assigned to me. I printed the packet before I left school and tucked it inside my algebra binder. On the bus ride home I let myself do something I should have known better than to do. I imagined telling my parents and seeing them proud. Not thrilled. Not transformed. I wasn't aiming that high. Just proud. I pictured Dad nodding once slow like he'd finally seen what I was worth. I pictured Mom putting a hand over her mouth and saying, "Leah, oh honey." I pictured Tyler being impressed against his will. It embarrasses me now how badly I still wanted a little clean recognition from people who had trained me to earn scraps. Hope can make a smart girl very stupid for a few minutes. I waited until breakfast Saturday because weekends were when Dad was in his best mood if business had been decent. Mom made pancakes. Tyler was headed to a tournament in Columbus. Grandma sat at the end of the counter with tea and half a banana, the green ledger closed beside her. I set the scholarship packet near Dad's coffee and said as casually as I could, "I heard back from Cincinnati." My father kept chewing. "I got in," I said. "And I got the Harper Merit Scholarship. It covers full tuition." Mom turned from the stove. Tyler looked up. Grandma's hand stilled on her teacup. Dad picked up the packet and read just enough to understand that I was serious. Then he looked at me with an expression I had spent my whole life trying not to earn. Not anger exactly. Something more insulting than anger. Dismissal, with a little offense mixed in, like I had overstepped in a way that inconvenienced him. "Business school," he said. I nodded. "Accounting and information systems. You applying to schools behind my back now?" I wasn't trying to hide it. I just wanted to have something real before I said anything. "You got a real thing right here." He jerked his thumb toward the garage. "That office. It's a scholarship, Dad. Full tuition. That doesn't pay rent. There are housing grants and I can work and—" "No. Just that." One word laid down like a board across a doorway. Mom said, "Rick." He lifted a hand and kept looking at me. "You don't need college, Leah. You already know the work. Phones, billing, scheduling. You're good at details. That's enough." My face got hot. "It's not enough for me." That was the line. I didn't know it until it left my mouth, but the whole kitchen knew it when it landed. Tyler stared at his plate. Mom's shoulders went tight. My father's jaw set the way it always did when reality refused to arrange itself around him fast enough. "For you," he said quietly, "this family has done a whole lot. We kept a roof over your head. We gave you a place in the business. Your brothers got games every weekend, your mother's stretched thin. And you think now's the time to run off and play college girl? I'm not running off. You are if you think you're leaving me without an office." And then he tore the packet in half. Not fast. Not wild. Slow enough to make the point. Slow enough that everybody had to watch. A few pages slipped onto the counter. The scholarship certificate tore straight through the university seal. One half slid into a little puddle of syrup by my elbow. Mom whispered, "Rick, that's enough." He dropped the pieces and reached for his coffee. "There. Saved you the trouble of making a bad decision." Nobody spoke. The thing about moments like that is they don't feel cinematic when you're inside them. The refrigerator still hums. Somebody's phone buzzes. A baseball cap falls off a chair. The world goes on being ordinary, while one part of your life is quietly cut away in front of you. I wish I could tell you I stood up. I wish I could tell you I said something sharp and clean and unforgettable, the kind of line people applaud in movies. What I actually did was reach for the torn pages before the syrup spread any farther. Old instincts are hard to kill. I gathered the pieces. I said, "I'll clean this up." That is what a parentified daughter sounds like when her heart is breaking. She sounds efficient. Grandma didn't speak. But when I stood up, I felt her eyes on me, not soft exactly, but alert in a way they hadn't been a minute before. Like someone had finally said the quiet part of our family out loud and she was taking stock. In my room I spread the torn pages over my desk. Not to tape them back together. I already knew enough by then to understand that college admissions did not depend on one piece of paper surviving breakfast. The acceptance was in my student portal. The scholarship was in the system. Paper was only paper. That should have comforted me. Instead it made the whole thing meaner. He hadn't destroyed my chance. He'd simply wanted the pleasure of acting like he could. I logged in from my laptop and read every line again. There it was in black and white. Enrollment deposit deadline. Housing confirmation. Orientation. Financial aid documents pending. Real. Still real. That afternoon I made my first mistake and my first good decision. The mistake was trying to reason with my father. I found him in the garage office after Tyler left for his tournament. He was sorting parts invoices, grease on his forearms, country radio low in the background. I stood in the doorway with the courage of somebody who had not yet learned that facts only matter to people who care whether they are wrong. "It's full tuition," I said. "I wouldn't be asking you to pay for school." He didn't look up. "Housing, food, books, gas, clothes. You think those show up by magic? I can work." "You already work." "I mean for myself." That got his attention. He leaned back in the chair. "That business school put that idea in your head too? You got a family, Leah. You don't get a separate self every time something shiny comes along." I said the next part too fast because I already knew I was losing. "Then just fill out the financial aid forms. That's all I need from you. They use your tax information and then I can figure the rest out." His expression changed. Not from disbelief. From caution. "No. Dad." I said no. "Why?" He pushed back from the desk so hard the chair wheels squealed. "Because I'm not turning over my information to a bunch of strangers. So you can go live in a dorm and forget where you came from. That's why. It's FAFSA. Everybody does it." "I'm not everybody." That line told me more than he meant it to. My father had always been weird about paperwork that wasn't on his terms. He liked cash jobs. He liked not explaining things. He liked saying the accountant would sort it out. Suddenly I saw that his refusal was not just about me leaving. It was also about his numbers being seen by somebody besides the people he could intimidate. Mom was no better. When I tried her that night while she was matching socks in the living room, she didn't even pretend to disagree with him. "Your father's under enough stress," she said. "The business is tight." "Then how are we paying for Tyler's travel team?" "That's different." "Why?" "Because he's the son," I thought. "Because his dreams look like investment and mine look like abandonment." But she didn't say that. She just folded another sock and said, "Because we need you here." There are sentences that explain your whole childhood in 6 words. I need you here. Not I'm proud of you. Not we'll figure it out. Need. Here. I went to school Monday with 3 hours of sleep and a headache that felt like a nail driven right behind my eyes. Miss Park took one look at me in homeroom and asked me to come by her office during lunch. I told her everything except the part where I still felt ashamed, as if wanting to leave home at 18 were some moral weakness instead of development. I told her Dad tore up the packet. I told her they refused FAFSA. I told her I didn't know how much of the rest I could cover, but I knew if I stayed in that house after graduation I was not getting out clean. Miss Park listened without interrupting, which is rarer than people think. Then she said, "First, a torn packet means nothing. Your admissions offer still stands. Second, some schools waive enrollment deposits for hardship. Third, if your home situation becomes unsafe or your parents are refusing cooperation in a way that traps you, financial aid offices do have processes for that. Not easy processes, but real ones." I stared at her. "Unsafe how? They don't hit me." She held my gaze. "Unsafe doesn't always leave bruises, Leah." I looked down at my hands. That was the first time anyone had offered me a definition of harm that included what was happening in my house. She helped me email the admissions office. She helped me draft a short explanation asking about a deposit waiver and next steps if parents refused to provide financial information. She told me to keep every message, every voicemail, every deadline, everything in writing. Documentation, she said, is a kind of power. I didn't know then how important that sentence would become. By Thursday, the university wrote back. The admissions office said I could request a deposit waiver based on financial hardship. The financial aid office said if my parents would not provide information, I should still complete what I could and contact them directly. They mentioned professional judgment and unusual circumstances. The words looked formal and far away, like something that happened to other people. Still, I printed the email. I folded it into my notebook and walked home feeling something I hadn't felt since before the scholarship packet hit the counter. Not confidence, but movement. Then I stepped into the garage office and heard my father telling a customer, "Yep, my daughter's taking over the front end after graduation. Smart girl. Good with numbers. Saves me hiring somebody I can't trust." I stopped cold outside the door. He said it so casually, like my life had already been entered into the calendar in ink. The customer laughed and said, "Nothing wrong with keeping family close." Dad said, "That's the plan." I stood there with the university email in my backpack and understood something ugly and clarifying all at once. This was never just about Dad believing college was a waste. It was about labor. Mine. Reliable, underpaid, grateful labor with his last name and no place to go. I backed away before he saw me. That night I ate dinner mostly in silence. Tyler talked about a showcase tournament in Indiana. Mom asked whether I could start freezing casseroles for the weekends so she wouldn't scramble while they were gone. Dad said he wanted me in the office full-time after finals because summer service calls got crazy. Nobody asked what I wanted. Grandma sat across from me with her tea and her green ledger. Halfway through the meal she looked at my plate, untouched except for cut-up chicken, and said, "You balancing books on an empty stomach now?" Dad snorted. "She's pouting." I said, "I'm tired." Grandma made a small sound that might have meant many things. After dinner, while Mom loaded the dishwasher and Tyler went upstairs to yell at a video game, Grandma knocked once on my open bedroom door. "Walk with me," she said. That was all. We went out to the back porch. The air smelled like cut grass and freon and the first hint of summer. Grandma lowered herself into the metal glider with more care than dignity, which I respected. Dignity is overrated when you're old enough not to perform it for free. "You want to tell me what's really happening?" she asked. I started with the scholarship. I ended somewhere around the words, "I think they need me more than they love me," which once spoken sat between us so naked and true I almost took them back. Grandma did not comfort me quickly. That was one of her best qualities. She never rushed to make pain prettier so other people could stand it. Instead she asked, "What degree?" "Accounting. Maybe information systems too." "Why?" Because that was the honest question, wasn't it? Not "Why do you want to leave?" "Why this?" I said. "Because numbers tell the truth if you know where to look. Because I'm good at it. Because every time I fix the books in that office, I feel like I can see the whole shape of what went wrong and make it make sense again." Grandma's eyes sharpened. "Fix the books how?" I hesitated. Then I told her. About the duplicate invoices. About cash jobs Dad didn't always log the same way twice. About checks moved from one pile to another depending on which bill was due. About him telling me to change dates in QuickBooks because the customer paid late, but it'll look better if this invoice closes in March. About my own queasy feeling that I was being asked to touch things I didn't understand enough to defend later. Grandma listened without blinking much. When I finished, she asked, "Has he had you sign anything?" "Just payroll stuff once or twice. And a bank document last fall, but he said it was to prove I worked there part-time." "Did you read it?" "No." "He was in a hurry." She looked out toward the dark line of the fence. "Your grandfather used to say desperation makes men sloppy. Pride makes them stupid." I waited. Finally she said, "Your father is both, which is not a good combination in a man running a business." I turned to her. "You knew." "I knew enough to stop doing his books 3 years ago." He said I was old-fashioned. What he meant was I wouldn't move numbers around because it helped him sleep at night. The porch seemed to tilt a little. Why didn't you tell me? Because until now, you still believed you were helping a family business. I wasn't going to be the one to tell an 18-year-old girl. Her father preferred free labor to honesty if I didn't have to. I was hoping he'd remember he had a daughter before he burned the bridge himself. I laughed once, but there was no humor in it. He didn't. No, she said. He did not. Then she reached down beside her chair and lifted the green ledger. I keep my own records, she said. Would you like to know something your parents never bothered to tell you? There are moments when your whole body knows bad news before your mind catches up. Mine did then. Grandma opened the ledger near the back where several envelopes were tucked into the spine. She handed me bank statements. Old ones. Newer ones. A savings account in my name opened when I was 6. What is this? Your college account. I stared at her. Your grandfather and I put birthday money in. Christmas money. A little from every tax refund. I added $50 a month after he passed when I could. Not enough for 4 years anywhere fancy. Enough to help. My throat closed. I never knew this existed. I know. Where is it? She let out a breath through her nose. 3 years ago your mother asked if they could borrow from it for 6 months. Furnace died in the shop, they said. Cash flow issue. She cried when she asked. Said Tyler's tournament schedule was expensive. Rick was behind on receivables, and they'd pay it back before you graduated. I looked at the last statement. The balance was under $200. They never did. No. It is one thing to suspect you were not the priority. It is another thing to hold printed proof that money saved under your name was drained to keep everybody else's plans on schedule, while you were told there just wasn't enough. I said very quietly, they used my college money. Grandma nodded once. And then they made you feel guilty for wanting college. I put the statements back in the envelope because my hands had started to shake. You kept all this? I said I keep records. She did not sound triumphant. Just exact. Then after a long pause, she said something that changed the air around me. Leah, I was 19 when my father laughed at the idea of me taking accounting classes at Sinclair. Said a girl with good penmanship didn't need college. Said offices were full of women already, and marriage was the real insurance policy. I believed him just long enough to ruin my own chance. I looked up. She smiled but not kindly. More like a woman acknowledging an old scar. So I am going to tell you something nobody told me. Useful is not the same as loved. And needed is not the same as chosen. I started crying then. Not loudly. Not dramatically. Just the exhausted crying of someone whose whole life has been translated for her in a single sentence. Grandma let me cry for maybe a minute. Then she said, tomorrow you and I are calling that school. The next week was the week my life stopped happening only inside my head. Ms. Park helped me finish the deposit waiver request. The admissions office approved it within days. Just like that, one obstacle vanished, not because my father relented, but because the world contained people who did not know him and therefore did not organize reality around his moods. The financial aid office was slower. I explained that my parents refused FAFSA cooperation and had threatened to keep me home in the business. I did not know whether that counted as unusual circumstances. The woman on the phone, whose name I still remember as Mrs. Delgado, spoke in the calm voice of someone who had heard many versions of the same control before. If providing parental information is impossible or unsafe, she said, or if cooperation is being used to trap you, document everything. We can review. I can't promise an outcome today, but I can promise we will read it. That sentence alone felt like oxygen. Miss Park wrote a statement. Grandma wrote one too in neat block letters describing the taken savings, the pressure to remain unpaid in the family business, the threats to housing if I left. I hated seeing my life turned into paragraphs with dates attached. I hated even more how strong it looked once it was on paper. At home things got worse. Control always gets uglier when it feels itself slipping. Dad started leaving summer schedules on my bed. Office hours. Service follow-ups. Notes about Tyler's tournaments, Mom's church committee, Grandma's appointments. He said them out loud too, the way people repeat plans they are afraid might stop being true if nobody hears them enough. You'll handle phones Monday. I need invoices cleaned up before June. Tyler's got a doubleheader Saturday, so make sure his uniform's ready. Each sentence assumed my future as a fact already settled. Mom got softer in tone and harsher in substance, which is in some ways the more dangerous kind of betrayal. She cried in the laundry room one night and said, "Why are you making this harder than it has to be?" I said, "For who?" She pressed a towel flat against the dryer like it had offended her. "For all of us. Your father's scared. The business can't take a hit right now. Tyler's college will be here before you know it. We just need a little more time. There are women who carry cages so long they start calling them homes. My mother had become one of them." "Mom," I said, "you used my college account." Her face changed, not with guilt exactly, with panic that the truth had surfaced in the wrong room. "That was temporary. It's been 3 years. We meant to fix it. But you didn't. We did what families do." "No," I said. "You did what people do when they know I'll clean up after them." She slapped the towel down and said the worst thing she could have said because it happened to be true. "And you always have." That night I started making copies. Every altered invoice. Every email from Dad telling me to move dates around. Every text where he referred to the office as mine after graduation without ever asking. Every note about housing threats. Every bank statement Grandma had saved. Every communication from the university. I scanned what I could at school and stored it in a folder on a flash drive Grandma hid in an old biscuit tin in her room. Not because we were planning to ruin him. Because we were planning to keep him from ruining me. That distinction matters. About 2 weeks before graduation, my school held senior awards night. Tyler had a tournament showcase the same evening. Dad didn't ask which mattered more. He simply assumed the answer. Mom said maybe she'd come for the beginning if traffic cooperated. It didn't. Or maybe she never meant to. Grandma wore a navy cardigan and lipstick she only used at weddings and funerals. She sat in the second row with her cane between her knees and clapped for every child like she had personally audited their transcripts. When they called my name for the scholarship, the room blurred again. Different from the first time. Sharper. The applause sounded real in a way home never did. Miss Park hugged me afterward and whispered, "See? There is a life with your name on it." In the hallway, while parents took photos and teachers passed out cookies on paper napkins, Grandma touched my elbow and said, "Look around." I did. Mother's crying. Dad's adjusting ties. Grandparents beaming. Kids laughing in clothes that still looked half borrowed from childhood and half borrowed from adulthood. "Do you notice?" Grandma asked. "How many people in this room are proud of these children without demanding payment for it?" I swallowed hard. That was the first time I understood just how transactional love had felt at home. 3 days later, the university emailed again. My unusual circumstances review had not been fully decided yet, but they were moving me forward for provisional processing and had flagged me for a small first-generation housing grant if documentation cleared. It wasn't a miracle. It wasn't a free ride. But it was movement again. Real movement. Enough that if I could hold my ground a little longer I could leave. Then my father changed tactics. He came into the garage office one Thursday evening while I was closing out service tickets and leaned against the doorframe with the false casualness he used whenever he thought himself generous. "Be ready tomorrow at 10, he said. "For what?" "Bank." I looked up. "We're renewing the business line," he said. "Thought maybe it's time you learn how that side works if you're so set on all this business nonsense." My whole body went still. "Why?" "Because I'm trying here, Leah." He spread his hands. "You wanted me to take you seriously. I'm taking you seriously. Come to the bank. See what real numbers look like. Maybe then you'll get why college can wait a year." A year. People say that like it's a season. Like it isn't often a life. Still I said yes. Part of me hated that. Hated how quickly old hope lifted its head if my father sounded almost reasonable for 3 consecutive seconds. But another part was curious. And a third part, the one Grandma had been feeding quietly for weeks, had already learned that when a controlling person suddenly gets cooperative, you should look for the hook. That night I told Grandma about the bank. She did not look surprised. "What time?" 10. "Good," she said. "I'll come." I laughed a little. "Dad didn't invite you." Grandma capped her pen and slid the green ledger closed. "I am not asking." Friday morning Dad drove. I sat in back because Tyler had left gear in the passenger seat, and Dad couldn't be bothered to move it. Grandma came out last in a tan coat despite the warmth, carrying her purse and cane. Dad said, "Mom, this doesn't concern you." She said, "Any bank meeting involving a teenage girl and your paperwork concerns me deeply." He muttered something under his breath but let her in. The bank was small and local, the kind with a tray of hard candy by the teller windows and a faded community events board in the lobby. Dad knew the loan officer, a man named Greg who wore his friendliness the way some men wear ties, professionally. He shook my hand, nodded to Grandma, and led us into an office with glass walls. There were papers already laid out. Too many of them for a simple educational outing. Greg smiled at me. "Your dad says you've been helping run the office for years." "I help," I said carefully. Dad jumped in. "She's modest. Best bookkeeping mind I've had around me, and that includes professionals. If you've been starved for praise long enough, even poison praise still lands for half a second before you taste the poison." Greg turned a packet toward me. "We're just updating some things for the line of credit, and getting everyone who's active in the business squared away." I looked down. Personal guarantee. Authorized signer. Employment verification. My name typed in 3 different places. The room went so quiet inside me I could hear the air vent. I said, "What is this?" Dad gave a short laugh. "Paperwork." "For what?" "So the bank can see continuity. You're already doing the job, Leah. This just makes it official." I looked at Greg. "If I sign this, what am I agreeing to?" Greg's smile thinned. He was now in the uncomfortable position of being the only man in the room who had not assumed my obedience for years. "Well," he said, "this would make you an authorized signer on the business account, and this piece would make you personally responsible under certain conditions if the credit line defaulted." I turned to Dad. "You want me to guarantee your business debt?" His face hardened. "It's family debt. Big difference." "No, it isn't." "Leah," he said through his teeth, "don't make a scene." And that was when Grandma, who had said almost nothing for 10 minutes, set her purse on Greg's desk and took out a pair of glasses. "I think," she said mildly, "the scene has already made itself." Dad closed his eyes for 1 second like a man dealing with weather. "Mom, stay out of this." Greg looked between us. "Mrs. Mercer, are you currently listed as a guarantor on the existing line?" "I am," she said. That got my attention. Dad's too. Grandma folded her hands over the cane handle. "Rick needed support when he started the business after the layoffs. My credit helped. I agreed because his children were small, and I believed a man under pressure might still remain decent if given a chance." Dad said, "This is not relevant." "It becomes relevant," Grandma said, "when that man brings his daughter to a bank under the impression he is educating her, while attempting instead to attach her clean name to debts he has no right to place on her shoulders." Greg sat very still. Dad flushed red. "That is not what this is." Grandma turned to Greg as if my father had not spoken. "I would like it noted that Leah Mercer has not been acting as a voluntary officer of this company. She has been an unpaid family labor source since adolescence. I also want it noted that she is college-bound, that her parents have refused to cooperate with financial aid paperwork in an effort to keep her in the business, and that any signature obtained today would be under family coercion." I stared at her. Greg stared at her too, but with the alarm of a banker who suddenly realized what kind of meeting he had accidentally scheduled. Dad leaned forward. "You have lost your mind." Grandma opened her purse again and pulled out copies. Not deeds. Not dramatic sealed envelopes. Photocopies. Bank statements from my college account. Text printed from my phone. My university scholarship letter. My deposit waiver approval. A written statement from Ms. Park. Grandma laid them on the desk one by one with the calm of a woman setting out silverware. "I have all my faculties," she said. "What I lost years ago was patience." Greg lifted one page, then another. His expression changed from social to corporate in real time. "Rick," he said slowly, "I think we need to pause this meeting." Dad looked at him like betrayal had just arrived wearing a name tag. "Pause what?" "My daughter signs, we're done." "I don't think your daughter is signing anything today." Dad stood up. "Leah." He said my name the way he said stop and enough and don't argue. A command wearing my name like a disguise. And for the first time in my life, In a room with witnesses and fluorescent lights and a bowl of hard candy by the teller line, I said, "No." Just that. No explanation. No apology. No softening phrase afterward. It left my mouth and did not kill me. Dad laughed once, short and disbelieving. "You think you can walk away from this family and leave me hanging?" The old me would have started negotiating right there. The old me would have said, "I'm sorry, I just can't sign, maybe there's another way, maybe after school, maybe." But Grandma had spent weeks quietly removing the maybe from my spine. I said, "You were willing to tie me to your debt so I couldn't leave." His face went blank for a second, which is different from empty. Blank is when the truth lands and a person decides whether to deny it or attack it. He chose attack. "Everything I've done has been for this family," Grandma said. "No, Rick. Most of what you've done has been for your comfort." Greg cleared his throat and slid the papers into a neat stack. "Mrs. Mercer, if you're withdrawing support as guarantor, that's a separate conversation we'll need to handle immediately." "I am," she said. Dad actually swayed a little, like the floor had changed material under him. "You can't do that." "I can," she said. "And I should have done it when you first asked your teenage daughter to move invoices around for you." He turned on me then, which was somehow worse than if he had kept shouting at her. "You ran to your grandmother? You ran to your school? You made me look like some kind of criminal." And there it was. Not what did I do? Not did I hurt you? Only how do I look? I looked at him and felt something strange and almost peaceful move through me. For years I had mistaken understanding him for a duty. If I just understood his stress, his pride, his pressure, his fear, then maybe I could love him correctly enough to make him gentler. But grown men are not weather systems their daughters are required to manage. "You did that yourself," I said. The bank meeting ended without another signature. Outside in the parking lot, Dad told me not to bother coming home if I was going to keep humiliating him. Mom, when she found out later, called me selfish, then hysterical, then scared, then silent, all within a 10-minute phone conversation that somehow made me feel older than she was. Grandma asked only one question. "Do you have enough packed?" I hadn't. Not really. I had a duffel bag with jeans, sneakers, my laptop, and the acceptance folder I'd reprinted at school. But readiness is not measured by how much fits in a bag. It is measured by whether you are finally willing to pick it up. That evening we went back to the house while Dad was still at the shop. Mom was in the kitchen, red-eyed and furious in the way people get when consequences arrive addressed to them. Tyler stood near the stairs holding a baseball bat by the barrel. Not threatening, just confused. Like he had wandered into a story where the rules changed without warning. Mom said, "So that's it? You destroy your father's credit and walk out." I almost laughed. The whole family had spent years treating me like the person responsible for everybody else's emotional weather. Of course, even now I was somehow being cast as the storm. "I didn't destroy anything," I said. "I refused to sign myself into it." "You're abandoning us." "No. I'm leaving." Tyler finally spoke. "Who's doing the office?" I looked at him. Not cruelly. Just honestly. "That is the saddest possible question you could ask me right now." He went pink and looked away. Mom tried one last time, softer. "Leah, families don't do this." I picked up my duffel. "The families you're talking about don't steal their daughter's college fund and then ask her to guarantee a business loan." She slapped a hand over her mouth. Not because I had said something untrue. Because I had said something true without lowering my voice first. Grandma behind me stood silent and solid as furniture that outlasts the house. I walked to the laundry room to get the rest of my things. While I was zipping the duffel, Mom came to the doorway. "I never wanted it to be like this," she said. That sentence has broken my heart in different ways over the years. Because I believed her. I believed she hadn't wanted it. And I also understood, finally, that not wanting it had never once stopped her from helping it happen. I said, "I know. Sometimes that is the kindest truth available." I left that night with Grandma. Not to a mansion she secretly owned. Not to money I hadn't earned. We went to her friend Marlene's condo across town because Marlene had a spare room and believed, as she put it, in girls getting out while they still know their own names. Grandma stayed with me there for 4 nights, sleeping on a pullout that made her knee ache, because that is what real loyalty looks like. Not speeches. Not control disguised as sacrifice. A woman in her late 70s eating gas station crackers in a borrowed condo, so her granddaughter can safely check her university email. My financial aid review came through the week after graduation. The school approved my unusual circumstances documentation for provisional independent processing, then permanent review once final paperwork cleared. The housing grant went through. Work study came through. A small emergency book stipend came through. It did not solve everything. Life is rarely repaired in one signature, but it made the shape of escape workable. Grandma covered my first month's meal plan gap from her own savings without making it feel like charity. "You can pay me back," she said. "Or you can do the more intelligent thing and never feel guilty for accepting a bridge someone offers in good faith." Dad did not call. Mom texted twice. Once to ask where the extra invoice folders were. Once to say Tyler had to miss practice because nobody had washed his uniform and she hoped I was happy. That second message was the moment I knew I was getting free. Because instead of crying, I stared at the screen and thought, you people really did build your whole life around assuming I would appear when something needed doing. I did not answer. I moved into my dorm in August with one duffel, one plastic tote, a used laptop, and Grandma beside me directing traffic like a retired general. The room was small and loud and smelled faintly of industrial cleaner and somebody else's vanilla body spray. It was beautiful. Girls moved in with color-coded bins and fathers carrying mini fridges and mothers arguing about duvet covers. I had Marlene's borrowed hand truck and Grandma's green ledger, because she insisted on writing down every expense from gas to parking to the absurd cost of command hooks. At one point she sat on the edge of my bed, looked around at the cinder block walls and the narrow desk and the view of another brick building and said, "Well, it's ugly as sin. Isn't it marvelous?" I laughed so hard I cried. Before she left, she pressed the little ledger into my hands. "It's yours now," she said. I opened it. The first page had my name and move-in date at the top. Beneath it, in her neat blue writing, she had listed every step from the scholarship email to the bank meeting to the housing grant approval. A record, not of what was spent, of what survived. I'm 26 now. I work in forensic accounting, which my grandmother finds hilarious because, in her words, I turned family trauma into a marketable skill. She's 87 and still sharper than most people half her age. She no longer keeps the green ledger every day, but she still circles suspicious totals in red when I show her stories from work. My father hired a real bookkeeper within 6 weeks of my leaving, because it turned out businesses do not run on declarations alone. The line of credit was restructured smaller after a long unpleasant review. He sold the extra truck the next spring. Tyler's travel ball schedule got leaner. The sky did not fall. It just cost them for the first time what it always should have cost. Tyler called me my sophomore year of college to ask if I could explain what accounts payable actually was, because Dad had him stuffing receipts into grocery bags and shouting that numbers aren't hard. He sounded embarrassed, which helped. Embarrassment is often the first honest emotion in a spoiled son. I explained it to him. Then I explained receivables. Then I explained why if he kept spending deposits before jobs were closed out, Dad was going to keep living in panic and calling it bad luck. Tyler was quiet a long time. Finally he said, "Did you used to do all this by yourself?" "Yes." Another pause. "Oh, that was the beginning of whatever relationship we have now. Not dramatic forgiveness. Not some movie speech. Just a boy realizing his older sister had been carrying weight he'd been taught not to see. My mother and I took longer. For the first year, every call between us felt like walking across ice that might crack if either one of us put full weight on the truth. She'd ask whether classes were hard. I'd say yes. I'd ask whether Grandma was taking her meds. She'd say yes. We stayed on the surface because the surface was survivable. Then one Christmas break, I came home to visit Grandma and found Mom alone in the kitchen staring at the old coffee tin where she still kept coupons and church envelopes. She looked older. Not in the ordinary way. In the way women do after the life they built starts asking them what it cost. She said without turning around, "I used to think if I kept everybody calm, nothing would break." I set my bag down and waited. She looked at me then. "I know that's what I taught you too." That was the closest she had ever come to an apology. I didn't rush to make it easier for her. I had learned by then that silence is sometimes the only room where truth can finish arriving. After a minute I said, "Everything was already breaking, Mom. I was just the part you used to hold it together." She cried. Quietly. Not beautifully. Just honestly. We are not healed in some perfect television way. She is still married to the same man. She still excuses too much. She still confuses endurance with virtue on her worst days. But she no longer asks me to come home and save the office. She no longer says family the way it means sacrifice in only one direction. Sometimes growth is not a transformed person. Sometimes it is simply a woman finally stopping one sentence before she hands you the rope again. As for my father, he spent the first 2 years after I left telling people I had been influenced by outsiders. Teachers. My grandmother. College. As if higher education were a cult and not the first place I had ever been treated like a person whose mind belonged to her. Then tax season happened my junior year. That is the version of justice people always want to hear about, so I'll tell it carefully. I did not report him. Grandma did not report him. Tyler did not report him. My father reported himself, in the way men like that often do, by being too certain he could keep shuffling the same bad numbers forever. The accountant he finally hired refused to sign off on certain records without corrections. Corrections led to questions. Questions led to amended filings, penalties, and one very expensive spring. Nothing criminal. Nothing flashy. Just the slow, humiliating cost of years spent treating bookkeeping like a suggestion. Dad called me once during that mess. I was in the student union eating soup out of a paper cup and reviewing an audit case study when his name lit up my phone. I stared at it long enough that the call almost went to voicemail before I answered. He did not ask how I was. He did not say he was proud. He did not apologize. He said, "You probably understand some of this better than that clown I hired." I actually smiled then, though not kindly. Because after everything, after the torn scholarship packet and the stolen savings and the attempted bank ambush, he was still reaching for my usefulness before my humanity. "What do you need, Dad?" I asked. He exhaled hard. He says the cash flow reporting is a mess. He says some invoices should have been recognized in different periods. He says, he cut himself off. "Can you look at something?" I stood there in the noise of the student union with plastic chairs scraping and espresso machines hissing, and felt the old instinct rise in me like muscle memory. Fix it. Translate it. Rescue him from the consequences. That instinct had lived in my body so long it still knew the path home even after my mind had changed address. So I put my soup down. I took a breath. And I said the sentence I had earned over years, not minutes. "No." He was silent. Then sharp. "No. No, Dad. You'd let your own family drown?" There was that word again. Family. Used like a bill collector. I said, "You are not drowning. You are being asked to clean up your own books. You could help." "I could," I said. "But helping is how I got trapped the first time." He started to say my name in that warning tone and I stopped him. "I love you," I said, because surprisingly heartbreak and love are not enemies. "But I am not available for this anymore." Then I hung up. My hands shook after. Not because I'd done the wrong thing. Because I'd done the right one without asking permission from the room. That matters. Maybe more than the rest. People think freedom looks like the train station, the dorm room, the first paycheck with your own address on it. Sometimes it does. But sometimes freedom is smaller and harder than that. Sometimes it is one phone call where you refuse to resume your assigned role. Sometimes it is the first holiday you attend without doing dishes automatically. Sometimes it is hearing a family emergency and understanding, for once, that it is not secretly your job. The last real conversation my father and I had happened 2 summers ago on Grandma's back porch. She had moved into a smaller place by then, 1 floor, 2 bedrooms, no stairs for her need to argue with. Dad came by to fix her AC unit because for all our history, he still shows up when machines break. Some habits are not nothing. I was there visiting. We ended up outside while the new unit kicked on and the evening cooled down. He sat in the porch chair and looked out at the yard for a long time before saying, "You think I wanted to keep you small?" It wasn't a question. I could have lied to make it easier. I didn't. "I think," I said slowly, "you wanted a life that ran smoothly for you. And anything that threatened that felt wrong, even if it was good for me." He rubbed his jaw. "I was trying to keep the family together." "No," I said. "You were trying to keep the family arranged." That landed. He did not argue. which, for my father, was as close to confession as language could manage. After a minute he said, "College changed you." I looked at him then and said, "No. It gave me a place where changing was allowed." He nodded once, almost to himself. "We are not close now. I want to be truthful about that. Some damage becomes distance even after the shouting stops. Some fathers never learn how to know a daughter they cannot control. But he does not mock my work anymore. He tells people I'm in investigations like it's something vaguely impressive and mildly threatening, which is probably the nicest accurate thing he has ever said about me. Grandma says that counts as progress from a Mercer man. She's still the best part of this story. At my college graduation, she wore the same navy cardigan from senior awards night and cried only once, which for Evelyn Mercer is the equivalent of a parade. When my name was called, she stood up before everyone else did. Not because she's rude. Because she had waited 60 years to see one Mercer woman get to the end of that walk without asking anyone whether she was allowed. After the ceremony, while people took photos in the May heat, and somebody's toddler smeared cupcake frosting onto my gown, Grandma handed me a long white envelope. I laughed. "You do love a dramatic paper reveal." "Open it," she said. Inside was a single page. Not money. Not property. Not some secret inheritance. It was the first ledger page from my move-in year, copied and laminated. At the bottom, beneath every expense and date and notation, Grandma had written one final line. Leah Mercer, paid in full to herself. I still have it. It sits framed in my office where clients never notice it and I do. Because that was the real revenge, if you want to call it that. Not ruining my father. Not humiliating my mother. Not making Tyler feel guilty enough to suffer on my behalf. The real revenge was that they built a life around assuming I existed to stabilize theirs, and I built one anyway. A whole one. One with my own lease, my own work, my own choices, my own money, my own weekends, my own silence when I want it and music when I don't. A life where numbers tell the truth because I no longer have to lie for anybody else's comfort. And the other part of the revenge, the quieter part, is this. I am no longer especially useful to people who only love me for what I can carry. That is the kind of freedom nobody teaches daughters early enough. If you are wondering what happened to the scholarship packet, I kept one torn piece for years. Just one. The half with my name and the university seal split down the middle. Not because I needed a reminder of what he did. I remember just fine. I kept it because it taught me something I was slow to learn. A person can tear paper. They can tear confidence. They can tear a plan in the middle of breakfast and call it protection. But they cannot tear the part of you that knows, however quietly, that your life belongs to you. That part survives in stranger places than people expect. In guidance counselors who stay late. In bank officers forced to listen. In grandmothers with ledgers. In women who have wasted enough years to recognize the theft before it becomes your entire future. In one good dorm room with ugly walls. In the first no that doesn't kill you. In the second one. In the 10th. My parents tore up my scholarship packet and told me I didn't need college. What I actually didn't need was permission from people who benefited from my smallness. Grandma changed my life, yes. But not by rescuing me the way fairy tales rescue girls. She changed it by showing me records. By telling the truth. By refusing to let my father turn love into debt. By standing in a bank office and saying what was happening out loud. By reminding me that support is not the same thing as surrender. She handed me evidence, not a fantasy. And that is a much sturdier gift. If you're sitting at a table where your future only sounds reasonable when it's useful to someone else, hear me clearly. Being needed is not the highest form of love. Being depended on is not the same as being valued. And the people who panic most when you grow are often the ones who built their comfort out of your obedience. Walk anyway. Learn anyway. Fly anyway. Keep the email. Save the screenshot. Make the call. Ask the counselor. Talk to the financial aid office. Tell the truth to one safe person. Then another. There are more doors in this world than the ones your family taught you to knock on. And sometimes the quiet woman at the edge of the room is not there to save you. She's there to hand you the ledger and make sure, when you leave, the story is finally written correctly. If this story reached into something you've lived, tell me in the comments about the moment you realized being useful was costing you your life. And subscribe if you want more stories where quiet people stop volunteering to be the bridge everyone else walks across.